The $5 Ranch. Part 1. The signature. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Not because of its weight, it was just a cheap ballpoint from the kitchen drawer, but because of what it was about to sign away. Or at least, what my husband thought it was signing away. I sat at our kitchen table, the same oak table where we'd shared 17 years of breakfasts, arguments, reconciliations, and dreams. The morning light cut through the window at that particular angle it only managed in October, painting everything gold. Beautiful. Almost cruel in its beauty. Across from me sat Marcus, my husband of 23 years, wearing an expression I'd come to recognize over the past 6 months. It was the look of a man who believed he was clever. The look of someone who thought he'd found the loophole, the escape hatch, the way to have everything he wanted without paying the price. Next to him, close enough that their shoulders touched, sat her. Vivian, 28 years old, yoga instructor, blonde hair that costs more to maintain than most people's car payments. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Marcus with this expression of manufactured adoration that might have fooled me once, before I learned what real love looked like and what performance looked like. The papers sat between us, legal documents that would transfer ownership of Red Canyon Ranch, $2 million worth of Montana prime real estate, complete with main house, guest house, stables, and 400 acres of the most beautiful land God ever made. From my name to hers. For $5. $5. It's really the cleanest way, Marcus was saying, his voice taking on that reasonable tone he used when he was being anything but reasonable. No lawyers, no court battles, no drama. You sign this, take your personal items, and we can all move forward with our lives, like adults. I looked down at the papers. My lawyer's voice echoed in my head from our meeting 3 days ago. Don't sign anything. Catherine, I'm begging you, don't sign a single piece of paper he puts in front of you. But David Chen didn't know what I knew. He didn't see what I'd seen. The $5 is symbolic, Vivian spoke for the first time, her voice breathy and soft, like she was narrating a meditation video. It represents the new beginning we're all making, the release of old energy, the invitation of new possibilities. I almost laughed. Almost. But I'd learned, over these past 6 months of watching my marriage dissolve like sugar and acid, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay absolutely still. Silent. Let people think they know what your silence means. They always get it wrong. Cat? Marcus leaned forward. He'd started calling me Cat again recently, a nickname from our early days, as if regressing to pet names could somehow soften what he was doing. I know this is hard, Catherine, but think about it. You never really loved the ranch anyway. You always said it was too isolated, too quiet. You complained about the winters. I had said that 7 years ago during a particularly brutal February when the snow had trapped us inside for 5 days and cabin fever had made me irritable. I'd said it once, maybe twice. Marcus had apparently filed it away as some kind of eternal truth about my character rather than what it was. A momentary frustration during a difficult season. That's what happens when someone decides they're done with you. Everything you've ever said gets reinterpreted as evidence that the ending was inevitable, that you were never really happy, that all of this, is somehow what you secretly wanted all along. I need to think, I said quietly. Marcus's jaw tightened. There it was, the flash of anger he couldn't quite hide anymore. We've been through this for weeks, Catherine. There's nothing left to think about. Either you sign and walk away with some dignity, or we go through the courts and I air every piece of dirty laundry we have. And trust me, his eyes went cold. I have plenty. The threat hung in the air like smoke. He was talking about my mother's alcoholism, my brother's stint in rehab, the miscarriage I had at 19 before I'd even met him. Things I'd shared with him in confidence. In the dark safety of our bedroom when I had still believed that intimacy meant sanctuary. Now those secrets were weapons. Vivian put her hand on Marcus's arm, a gesture of restraint that was pure theater. Baby, don't. This should be peaceful, healing. She turned to me, and I saw it then. the glint of triumph she couldn't quite hide behind all that spiritual bypassing. She thought she'd won. She thought she was getting the ranch, the man, the life, all for $5 and some patience. She had no idea what was coming. I picked up the pen. Marcus's whole body relaxed. Vivian's smile grew wider, more genuine.
I need 24 hours, I said, setting the pen back down. That's all. 24 hours to say goodbye to the ranch properly, to process this. Then I'll sign. I watched Marcus calculate, weighing his impatience against the risk of pushing too hard. He was close enough to what he wanted that he could afford to be magnanimous. Fine, he said. 24 hours. But Catherine, he leaned forward. This is happening. Whether you're ready or not, this marriage is over. The ranch is going to be Vivian's. You need to accept that. I stood up, smoothing down my jeans, and looked at him. Really looked at him. At this man I'd loved since I was 27 years old, who I'd built a life with, who I'd stood beside through his father's death, his failed business ventures, his depression, his victories. This man who was now looking at me like I was an obstacle to be moved, rather than a person to be honored. I accept it, I said softly. And I did. Not the way he thought I did, but in my own way. I accepted that the man I'd married was gone, if he'd ever really existed at all, and that the person sitting in front of me was someone I didn't recognize, someone I didn't particularly like. And I accepted that what came next was going to hurt him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. I smiled. Just a small one, just the barest curve of my lips. I'll see you both tomorrow. Part 2. The history. The ranch looked different as I drove up the long gravel driveway that afternoon. Not physically different. It was still the same sprawling property that had taken my breath away the first time Marcus brought me here, 8 years into our marriage. The mountains still rose up behind it like sleeping giants. The aspens still shimmered gold and green in the wind. The main house still sat solid and beautiful, all timber and stone, and windows that caught the light like promises. But now I saw it with the eyes of someone saying goodbye. Or at least, letting everyone think I was saying goodbye. I parked the truck and sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. This land had a particular kind of quiet to it, not the dead silence of absence, but the rich silence of presence. Wind through grass, distant bird calls, the creek running somewhere beyond the trees. Marcus had never heard it. He'd wanted the ranch as a trophy, a sign that he'd made it, but he'd never actually been present here, not the way I had. That should have been my first clue, really. When someone loves a thing for what it represents rather than what it is, they'll always be willing to trade it for something that represents more. I went inside the main house, breathing in the smell of cedar and wood smoke and the lavender sachets I'd hung in every closet. The house felt empty even though all our things were still in it. Marcus had been staying in town with Vivian for the past month, coming back only for these negotiation sessions, these orchestrated performances of conscious uncoupling, or whatever bullshit term they were using to dress up betrayal. I walked through the room slowly, letting myself remember. Here was the living room where we'd hosted Christmas for my family 3 years running. Here was the kitchen where I'd learned to make sourdough bread from scratch during the pandemic. Here was the bedroom where we made love and made plans and eventually made excuses for why we never touched anymore. Every room was a ghost of something. But I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here for insurance. I went to the study, Marcus's study technically, though he'd barely used it in the past 2 years, and opened the bottom drawer of the desk. It stuck, like it always did, requiring just the right angle of pressure to slide free. Inside were the documents I'd been collecting for the past 6 months. It started, like these things often do, with a feeling, a sense that something was wrong, though I couldn't name what. Marcus had become distant, distracted. He blamed work stress, the economy, his age. All plausible explanations, all lies. The first real evidence was a credit card bill. Hidden, actually, pushed to the back of a file cabinet like he thought I'd never look. Charges at restaurants we'd never been to, hotels in towns I'd never visited, a jewelry purchase for $5,000 that I'd never received. Most women discovering this would have confronted their husband immediately.
Screamed, cried, demanded explanations, maybe thrown the bill in his face. I did none of those things. Instead, I hired a private investigator, a woman named Sarah Reeves, who came highly recommended and didn't waste time with platitudes or pity. She gave me facts. Marcus had been seeing Vivian for 14 months. They'd met at a wellness retreat he attended for work. They'd been careful, but not careful enough. Sarah gave me photographs, time-stamped location data, copies of text messages recovered from cloud backups he'd forgotten to delete. The messages were the worst part. Not because they were sexual, though they were, but because they were intimate in a way Marcus hadn't been with me in years. He was vulnerable with her, playful, present. All the things I'd been begging him to be with me, he was giving to her without her even having to ask. That's when I stopped feeling sad and started feeling strategic. I hired a lawyer, not a mediator, not a therapist who dabbled in legal advice, but a shark. David Chan had a reputation for winning complex asset cases, and when I sat in his office and laid out the situation, his eyes had lit up with the particular fire of someone who loves a challenge. Here's what most people don't know, he'd told me in that first meeting. Montana is not a community property state. It's an equitable distribution state. That means the court divides assets based on what's fair, not just what's equal. And fair takes into account things like who brought what into the marriage, who maintained it, who improved it. I leaned forward. The ranch was purchased with my inheritance, my grandfather's money. I'm the only one on the original deed. David had actually smiled. Then you can't touch it, not legally. He can try, but unless you voluntarily sign it over, which you should never, ever do, that ranch is yours, protected. But what if I did sign it over? I'd asked. What if I let him think he'd won? That's when David had looked at me with new appreciation. Then we'd be playing a very different game. But I have to warn you, it's risky. If you sign away your rights, I wouldn't be signing away my rights. I'd be signing away his fraud, the documentation. The documents in the desk drawer told a story, a comprehensive, damning, meticulously documented story. First, the property records, showing that Red Canyon Ranch was purchased 8 years ago with $1.8 million from my grandfather's estate. My name and only my name on the original deed. Marcus had been added later, yes. I'd done that in a moment of romantic idealism, wanting everything to be ours instead of mine. But the source of funds was crystal clear. Second, the improvements. Every renovation, every upgrade, every investment in the property funded by my consulting business, which I'd built from nothing while Marcus pursued his various entrepreneurial ventures, none of which had ever turned a profit. I had the receipts, the bank statements, the canceled checks. $400,000 in improvements over 8 years, all traceable back to my accounts. Third, the valuation reports. I'd had the property appraised 6 months ago when I first started preparing for this inevitable moment. $2 million, possibly more if we sold during peak season. The land alone was worth $1.2 million. Fourth, and most importantly, the evidence of fraud. This is where I'd gotten creative. This is where I'd gone from victim to strategist. See, Marcus didn't know that I'd discovered his plan months ago. Sarah's investigation hadn't just uncovered the affair, it had uncovered text messages between Marcus and Vivian where they discussed in explicit detail how they were going to get the ranch for nothing. She'll never fight it, he wrote. She's too tired, too beaten down. We'll lowball her, make it seem like she's getting a clean break, and she'll take it just to be done. And then it's ours, Vivian had responded. Like, actually legally ours. For $5, baby. Symbolic. Beautiful. She signs it over to you to avoid litigation. You gift it back to me, and we're set. The consultants say it's the cleanest way to avoid asset division. The consultants. He'd hired consultants on how to defraud me. That text message alone was worth its weight in gold. But I'd let the plan progress. I'd played the part of the worn-down wife. I'd been quiet when he brought up divorce, docile when he suggested the signing, hesitant in exactly the way someone in my supposed position would be. And while I played that part, I'd been building my own case. I documented everything. His hidden assets, 3 bank accounts I wasn't supposed to know about, his business dealings, including some questionable tax maneuvers that the IRS would find very interesting, and most crucially, his fraudulent intent with the ranch transfer. Because here's what Marcus didn't understand about the law. You can't give away what isn't yours, and you definitely can't conspire to defraud someone out of their property through manipulation and emotional coercion. The $5 transfer wasn't a clean break. It was textbook fraud. I gathered all the documents back into their folder and slid the drawers shut. Tomorrow, I would sign the papers. Tomorrow, Marcus and Vivian would think they'd won. They'd celebrate. Maybe they'd even move into the ranch immediately, eager to claim their prize.
And then, exactly 72 hours after that signing, my lawyer would file a motion to void the transfer on grounds of fraud, duress, and unconscionability. He'd present evidence of Marcus's hidden assets, his admitted conspiracy to defraud me, and the gross inequity of a $5 purchase price for a $2 million property. The court would freeze everything, all of it, not just the ranch, but Marcus's accounts, his assets, everything we'd accumulated during the marriage. And then we'd go through discovery, where all those dirty little secrets he'd threatened me with would come out, along with all of his. But I'd go one step further. I picked up my phone and pulled up the contact I'd saved under J.M., Jennifer Marsh, investigative journalist for Montana's largest newspaper. She'd reached out to me 3 months ago, working on a story about financial fraud in divorces, and I demurred then, saying I wasn't ready to go public. Now I was ready. I typed out a message. I'm prepared to talk. On the record. I have documentation of fraud, coercion, and conspiracy in a high-asset divorce case. Are you still interested? The response came within minutes. Absolutely. When can we meet? Next week, I wrote back. After the story really begins. Part 4. The performance. That night, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, I was past anxiety, but from a strange, crystalline awareness. Every sound seemed sharper, every thought more clear. I lay in bed in the guest house. I'd moved out of the main house when Marcus started spending nights in town, and watched the shadows of tree branches dance across the ceiling. Part of me wondered if I was being vindictive, if this elaborate plan was less about justice and more about revenge. I examined that thought from all angles, like turning a stone over in your hand, checking for rough edges. But no, this wasn't revenge. Revenge would have been immediate, hot, destructive. This was something else. This was protection. This was standing up not just for myself, but for every woman who'd been told that accepting less was the same as taking the high road, that silence was dignity, that letting someone steal from you was somehow more spiritual than fighting back. I'd been that woman once. Quiet, accommodating, believing that if I just loved hard enough, sacrificed enough, understood enough, everything would work out. That love was supposed to be selfless, boundless, unconditional. But I'd learned in these past months of watching my marriage die and then carefully documenting its death that unconditional love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's self-erasure. And self-erasure doesn't save relationships, it just makes you disappear. So, no, this wasn't revenge. This was reconstruction. This was building a new life from the rubble of the old one and making damn sure that the person who'd set the fire didn't get to keep the insurance money. Morning came soft and golden. I made coffee, fed the horses, they'd be coming with me when this was all over, I'd already arranged boarding, and showered slowly, deliberately. I chose my clothes with care. Jeans, a simple white shirt, no jewelry except my wedding ring. I wanted to look like someone who was surrendering, someone who'd accepted defeat. Marcus and Vivian arrived at 10 a.m. exactly, his new Tesla crunching on the gravel drive. They'd brought their own notary, a bored-looking man in his 60s who clearly did this kind of thing so often he didn't bother with small talk. We sat at the kitchen table again. Same positions as yesterday, same papers, same pen. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I've thought about what you said. I told Marcus, my voice quiet. About moving forward. About clean breaks. You're right. Fighting this would be ugly. Expensive.
painful for everyone. I could see him trying not to look triumphant. Vivian was less skilled at hiding her emotions. Her smile was radiant.
I want to be clear about a few things, though, I continued, for the record. The notary perked up slightly, sensing something interesting might actually happen. This ranch was purchased with my inheritance, my grandfather's money. I've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars of my own earnings into improving it. Legally, it's mine to dispose of as I wish. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Kat, we agreed. I'm not finished. My voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath it now. I want it noted that I'm signing this transfer of my own free will, without coercion. I paused meaningfully, and with full knowledge of what I'm giving up. The notary was writing this down. Good. I want it noted that the purchase price of $5 is a nominal consideration, not reflective of the property's true market value of approximately $2 million. Catherine, Marcus's voice had an edge now. And I want it noted that I understand this transfer, once completed, means I have no further claim to this property. That's exactly what it means, Vivian said, her voice losing some of her meditation teacher softness. That's the whole point. I know. I picked up the pen one more time. I just want to be absolutely clear that I understand what I'm doing. I signed my name slowly, carefully. Catherine Rose Ashford. The same signature I'd used on my wedding certificate 23 years ago. The same signature I'd used on my grandfather's estate documents when I inherited the money that bought this ranch. The same signature that had been on every check, every contract, every piece of paper that had built this life. The same signature that was now, apparently, worth $5. The notary stamped the documents. Marcus exhaled audibly. Vivian actually clapped her hands together like a child who'd been given a gift. This is so beautiful, this conscious release of attachment. Your spirit is going to feel so free, Catherine. I stood up, pushing back from the table. When do you want me out? We were thinking end of the week, Marcus said, glancing at Vivian. Give you time to pack, arrange movers, all that. I'll be out by Wednesday. I don't need that much time. Because I didn't. Everything that mattered, the horses, my personal items, my documents, was already arranged for. I'd been packing for weeks, in small batches, so it wouldn't be obvious. I had learned to plan in the spaces between things, in the hours when Marcus wasn't paying attention. I'd learned to be invisible in my own life while simultaneously preparing to be undeniable. Kat, Marcus said as I headed for the door. I turned back. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Was it doubt? Guilt? Some late-arriving awareness that maybe he'd gone too far? But then Vivian's hand was on his shoulder, and whatever I'd seen was gone. Thank you, he said, for making this easy. I smiled. That same small smile from yesterday. You're welcome. Part 5. The Unraveling. I moved into a rental in town on Tuesday, a small but comfortable house with mountain views and room for the horses in the property's back acreage. The owners, an older couple who'd known my family for years, had been surprised when I'd rented it 6 months ago. Planning ahead, Mrs. Henderson had asked, kindly, not prying, but available if I wanted to talk. Just being prepared, I'd said. Now, unpacking my boxes in the bright living room, I felt a strange sense of peace. This house wasn't mine. Not yet. But it was mine in a way the ranch never had been. I chose it. I'd arranged for it. I'd created this safety net while Marcus had been busy weaving his trap. My phone rang Wednesday afternoon. David Chen, my lawyer. I've been looking at the documents you sent over. The transfer went through. They took possession of the ranch yesterday. Good, I said. Catherine, his voice was cautious. I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this? Once we file, there's no going back. It's going to get ugly. They're going to fight hard. I'm certain, okay? I could hear the shift in his voice, from lawyer to warrior. Then let's burn it down. Friday morning, exactly 72 hours after I'd signed the transfer, David filed a motion in Montana District Court to void the property transfer on multiple grounds. Fraud in the inducement,
unconscionable, constructive fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and economic duress.
The filing included exhibits, text messages between Marcus and Vivian discussing their plan to get the ranch for nothing, bank statements showing Marcus's hidden accounts, valuation reports, my documented improvements to the property, Marcus's own admissions in writing that he knew the $5 consideration was not reflective of true value. But the most damning exhibit was one I'd been saving for last. A recorded conversation from 2 weeks ago when Marcus had called me to finalize details, and I'd, completely legally, since Montana is a one-party consent state, recorded the call. On that recording, Marcus said, clear as day, "Look, you can either sign the ranch over now for nothing and slink away, or I can drag you through court and make sure everyone knows every ugly thing about you. Your choice, but either way, I'm getting that ranch." Threats, coercion, all the things you absolutely cannot do when trying to acquire someone's property. David had whistled when I'd played him that recording. You're either brilliant or terrifying. Can't I be both? The court immediately issued a temporary restraining order, freezing the property. Marcus and Vivian, who had been planning to host a celebration at the ranch that weekend, instead got served with papers. I heard about it from Sarah, my investigator, who'd stayed on retainer to monitor the situation. "They're panicking," she reported. "Marcus has hired a lawyer, James Reynolds. Decent, but nothing special. He's arguing that you signed willingly, that there was no fraud, that you're just having seller's remorse." "Good," I said. "Let him argue that. We'll see how it holds up in discovery." But the legal maneuvering was only part one of my plan. Part two kicked in the following Monday when Jennifer Marsh's article hit the front page of the Montana Tribune. Love, Lies, and Land Fraud: How One Woman Refused to Stay Silent. Jennifer had done beautiful work. The article laid out the entire story: the affair, the conspiracy, the fraudulent transfer, the intimidation. She'd interviewed David, who spoke eloquently about the prevalence of economic abuse in divorces. She'd gotten quotes from other women who'd been pressured into unfair settlements. And she'd interviewed me. I'd been careful about what I said. I didn't trash Marcus. I didn't need to. I just told the truth. About feeling like I had to make myself smaller to make him comfortable. About discovering the affair. About the choice I'd faced: accept the fraud and disappear, or stand up and fight. I kept thinking about my grandmother, I told Jennifer. She once told me that silence is only golden when you choose it. When someone forces it on you, it's just another form of theft. And I was tired of being stolen from. The article went viral, local first, then regional, then picked up by national outlets hungry for stories about women fighting back. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, producers, women I'd never met telling me their own stories of being pressured into silence. Marcus's business started losing clients. Vivian's yoga studio saw memberships drop. The court of public opinion, which Marcus had threatened to use against me, instead turned on him with a force he hadn't anticipated. But I felt no satisfaction in that. I hadn't done this for revenge. I'd done it because sometimes the only way to stop being a victim is to become a witness. To stand up and say, clearly and publicly, this happened. This was wrong. And I refuse to pretend otherwise. Part 6. The settlement. The legal battle took 4 months. 4 months of depositions, motions, arguments, and negotiations. Marcus's lawyer tried every angle. I'd signed willingly. I'd been vindictive. I'd orchestrated the whole thing to make Marcus look bad. But the evidence was overwhelming. The text messages, the recording, the hidden assets, and crucially, the testimony of the notary, who, when deposed, admitted that he'd found the transfer unusual and that I had seemed unusually specific about documenting my understanding of what I was signing. Looking back, he'd said in his deposition, it seemed like she was creating a record, like she knew this wouldn't be the end of it. Because I had known. I'd known from the moment I'd hired Sarah 6 months earlier
that this would end in court, not in acceptance. I just needed Marcus and Vivian to incriminate themselves first. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Patricia Morris, heard arguments from both sides and took exactly 1 day to issue her ruling. The transfer was voided, completely, totally, immediately. The evidence of fraud, coercion, and unconscionability is overwhelming. The defendant, husband, clearly engaged in a conspiracy to defraud the plaintiff of her rightful property through a combination of emotional manipulation, intimidation, and false pretenses. The nominal consideration of $5 for a property worth approximately $2 million shocks the conscience. The transfer is hereby declared void ab initio, void from the beginning, and the property is restored to the plaintiff as sole owner. But Judge Morris went further. She ordered Marcus to pay me $200,000 in sanctions for pursuing the fraudulent transfer. She ordered him to reimburse all my legal fees, and she issued a permanent injunction preventing him from ever making any claim to Red Canyon Ranch. Furthermore, she wrote, and this was the part that made me cry when David read it to me over the phone, the court commends the plaintiff for her courage in standing up to economic abuse and in refusing to be silenced by threats and intimidation. The court hopes that this decision will serve as notice that such behavior will not be tolerated. I sat in my rental house, phone to my ear, and let the tears come. Not tears of victory, though I had one, but tears of release, of recognition, of finally being seen. Kat? David's voice was gentle. You there? I'm here, I said. I'm here. You did it. You actually did it. We did it, I corrected. I couldn't have done this alone. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't quite true. David had been essential, yes. Sarah had been crucial. Jennifer had given me a platform. But the core of it, the decision to document, to stand up, to refuse to disappear, that had been mine alone. Part 7. The aftermath. The legal settlement negotiations after the judge's ruling were swift. Marcus, facing potential criminal fraud charges if the district attorney decided to pursue the case, was suddenly eager to be reasonable. He kept his business, his car, his retirement accounts. I kept the ranch, my own accounts, and my horses. We split the remaining marital assets down the middle, which, given that my business was worth considerably more than his, worked decidedly in my favor. Vivian left him 3 weeks after the judge's ruling. Apparently, losing the ranch had taken some of the shine off their spiritual connection. Marcus called me once, drunk, at 2 a.m., asking how I'd done it. Done what? I asked. Though I knew. All of it. The planning. The documentation. The trap. It wasn't a trap, Marcus. It was consequences. There's a difference. I loved you, he said. And he sounded so lost that I almost felt sorry for him. No, I said gently. You loved what I gave you. You loved how I made you feel. But you never loved me. If you had, you wouldn't have been able to do what you did. He hung up without responding. I moved back into the ranch in June, almost exactly 1 year after I'd first hired Sarah. The property looked the same but felt different. Lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from the land itself. Mrs. Henderson helped me unpack, bringing casseroles and wisdom in equal measure. I knew you had a plan, she said, arranging flowers in the kitchen. The moment you rented that house, I knew. You've got your grandmother's steel in you. I spent so long trying to be soft, trying to be easy to love. Nothing wrong with soft, but soft doesn't mean weak. Your grandmother knew that. Now you know it too. The horses settled back into their stalls like they'd never left. I hired a new ranch hand, a quiet woman in her 40s who was rebuilding her life after her own divorce. We didn't talk about it much, but there was an understanding between us. A recognition. Jennifer's article had launched her career. She'd been hired by a national magazine to write a series on economic abuse in relationships. She called me once a month, updating me on responses from readers, new stories she was uncovering, laws that were being proposed to better protect people in situations like mine. You started something, she told me. You know that, right? Women are calling lawyers. They're documenting. They're refusing to just accept unfair settlements. You gave them a roadmap. I didn't know how to feel about that. I'd never intended to be a symbol. I just wanted to keep my ranch. But maybe that was the point. Maybe revolution starts not with grand gestures, but with one person saying, "No, not this time, not to me." Epilogue. The $5 lesson. A year later, I'm sitting on the porch of the ranch, watching the sunset paint the mountains impossible shades of orange and pink. The horses are grazing in the far pasture. The guest house has been renovated into a studio apartment that I'm planning to rent to women who need a safe place to land while they rebuild their lives. My consulting business has grown. Turns out that surviving economic abuse and navigating complex legal battles gives you a certain reputation for strategic thinking. I'm selective about my clients now, working only with people and companies I actually believe in. I'm alone, but I'm not lonely. There's a difference, I've learned. Lonely is wanting to be with someone and not being able to. Alone is choosing solitude and finding it nourishing. I've dated a little, nothing serious. I'm not ready for serious. Maybe I never will be again, and that's okay. I've learned that completeness doesn't require coupling, that a full life can be built from work you love, land you tend, animals you care for, and the fierce, quiet knowledge that you will never again make yourself small for someone else's comfort. Sometimes I think about that moment at the kitchen table, signing those papers. I remember Marcus's face, the certainty in his eyes that he'd won. Vivian's smile, her assumption that spiritual language could dress up theft. And I remember my own smile, that small, secret smile that they'd mistaken for surrender. People ask me sometimes, was it worth it? The fight, the publicity, the money, the time? And I always say yes. Not because I got the ranch back, though I did. Not because Marcus faced consequences, though he did. But because I proved something to myself that I'd started to doubt, that I had a spine, that I could stand up, that my voice, when I finally chose to use it, could cut through lies like light through fog. The $5 sit in a frame on my desk now. I had Vivian's check bronzed and mounted, a reminder, not of what someone tried to steal from me, but of what they failed to take. My dignity, my strength, my refusal to be silenced. That, it turns out, was never for sale. Not for $5, not for 5 million, not for the false peace of acceptance or the seductive comfort of staying small. Some things, I learned, are simply priceless. And sometimes silence isn't defeat. Sometimes it's just a woman taking a breath, gathering her evidence, and preparing to speak in a voice that can't be ignored. Sometimes silence is strategy. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who's already won, just waiting for everyone else to realize it. I smile, watching the sun slip the mountains, and raise my coffee mug in a silent toast to my grandmother, who taught me that grace and steel aren't opposites. They're partners. The ranch is quiet tonight, the kind of quiet that used to make Marcus restless. But I've learned to hear what lives in the silence. The wind carrying stories across the grass, the creek writing its endless song over stones, the horses breathing softly in their stalls, content. My phone buzzes. A text from Sarah, my investigator, who has become something close to a friend in the strange way that happens when someone helps you excavate your life. Sal Marcus at the grocery store. He looked rough. Didn't see me. Thought you'd want to know he's still in town. I don't respond immediately. There was a time when news about Marcus would have sent my heart racing, would have triggered that old anxiety, that old hope that maybe he'd realize what he'd lost and try to make amends. But that time is long gone. Now I just feel neutral. Not hatred, not pity, just the distant acknowledgement that he exists somewhere out there, living with the consequences of his choices the way I'm living with mine. The difference is, I like my consequences. I finally text back, "Thanks for letting me know. I hope he's okay." And I mean it. Not because I've forgiven him. Forgiveness is complicated, and I'm still working through what I owe him versus what I owe myself, but because I've reached a place where his suffering doesn't feed me anymore, where I don't need him to hurt for me to heal. That's the thing they don't tell you about justice. Everyone imagines it as this triumphant moment where the villain gets their comeuppance and you feel vindicated and whole. And maybe some people do feel that way.
But for me, justice was quieter. It was the judge's ruling, yes. The money, yes. The ranch returned to my name, yes. But more than any of that, it was the moment, somewhere in the middle of the legal battle, on a random Tuesday morning, when I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I wasn't afraid of what people would think. I wasn't afraid that standing up for myself made me vindictive or bitter or unfeminine or any of the other words that get weaponized against women who refuse to be diminished. I was just standing. Solid ground under my feet. My own ground. Part 8. The Woman in the Mirror. 3 months after the settlement, I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked, not the quick glance you do when checking your teeth or making sure your hair is brushed, but the long, honest assessment you avoid when you're not sure you'll like what you see. I was 49 years old. Lines around my eyes that hadn't been there when I married Marcus. Gray threading through my dark hair that I'd stopped coloring 6 months ago. Deciding that pretending to be younger wasn't serving anyone. A body that had carried pregnancies that didn't stick, grief that did, and work that shaped muscle and calluses in equal measure. I looked tired. I looked strong. I looked like someone who'd been through fire and decided to learn from the burning rather than just survive it. "Who are you?" I asked my reflection. The woman looking back didn't answer immediately. She just held my gaze, steady and unflinching. I was someone who'd spent 23 years trying to be the right kind of wife. Supportive but not clingy, independent but not threatening, sexy but not too sexual, smart but not intimidating, successful but not more successful than him. I was someone who learned to read moods and adjust accordingly, to sense when to be present and when to be invisible, to carry the emotional labor of an entire marriage on my shoulders while pretending it weighed nothing. I was someone who'd swallowed her own needs so consistently that I'd almost forgotten I had them. But I was also someone who'd refused to disappear, who'd chosen documentation over devastation, who'd turned betrayal into evidence and silence into strategy. I was someone who'd learned, finally, that protecting yourself isn't the same as being defensive, that boundaries aren't walls. They're just honest statements about where you end and someone else begins. "I'm Catherine," I told my reflection, "and I'm enough." The woman in the mirror smiled. Not the small, careful smile I'd given Marcus and Vivian, not the performance. Just a real, genuine expression of recognition. "Yeah," she seemed to say. "Yeah, you are." Part 9. The letters. They started arriving about 2 months after Jennifer's article published. Letters, emails, messages on social media from women I'd never met. The first one came from a woman in Oregon. "Dear Catherine, I've been married for 15 years to a man who's been slowly convincing me that I'm crazy, that my memories are wrong, that my feelings are invalid, that I'm too sensitive, too emotional, too much. Your story made me realize I'm not crazy. He's just lying. I've started documenting everything. Thank you for showing me it's possible to stand up." Then a woman in Texas. "My husband cheated, and when I confronted him, he told me I should be grateful he stayed, that at my age, with my body, I was lucky anyone wanted me at all. I believed him.
I was preparing to accept whatever scraps he offered. Your story reminded me that I deserve more than scraps. I've hired a lawyer, a woman in Maine. I thought protecting my kids meant avoiding conflict, even when their father was draining our accounts and hiding assets. I thought being a good mother meant being a quiet wife. Your story showed me that teaching my daughters to watch me accept abuse would be the worst thing I could do. We're filing next week. They kept coming. Dozens, then hundreds. Women who'd been made to feel like asking for fairness was the same as being difficult. Women who'd been told that love meant endless understanding, infinite patience, perpetual forgiveness without any requirement for change. Women who'd been taught that silence was dignity and speaking up was drama. I read every single letter. I couldn't respond to all of them, there were too many, and I had my own life to rebuild. But I read them. And in reading them, I started to understand what Jennifer had meant about starting something. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was our story. The collective story of women who'd been told to be smaller, quieter, more accommodating, and who'd finally decided, no, not anymore. Some of the letters came from men, too. That surprised me. I did what your ex-husband did. Not the same exactly, but close enough. I cheated, I manipulated, I made my wife feel like she was the problem when I was the one breaking our marriage. She left me and I spent 2 years being angry at her for not forgiving me. Your story made me realize she didn't owe me forgiveness. She owed herself freedom. I'm writing to say thank you for helping me see what I was too selfish to see before. I'm in therapy now. I'll never get her back, and I don't deserve to. But maybe I can be better for whoever comes next. I saved that letter, not because it absolved Marcus, it didn't, couldn't, but because it reminded me that growth is possible, that people can choose to see their own behavior clearly and do the work to change. Marcus hadn't chosen that. Maybe he never would, but some people did. And that mattered. Part 10, the new normal. By the fall, I'd settled into a rhythm. Up at dawn to feed the horses, morning coffee on the porch watching the light change, work from my home office, consultations with clients, strategic planning sessions, the occasional speaking engagement about business resilience and personal boundaries. I'd been invited to speak at a women's business conference, which had terrified me. I'm not a public speaker, I told the organizer. You don't have to be. Just tell your story. That's all anyone wants to hear. So I did. I stood in front of 300 women and told them about the ranch, the betrayal, the $5 transfer, the decision to document instead of crumble. I used to think strength meant not showing weakness. I thought it meant handling everything alone, never asking for help, never admitting when I was struggling. But real strength, the kind that actually sustains you, comes from knowing when to be vulnerable and when to be strategic, from understanding that you can be hurt and powerful at the same time, that needing support doesn't make you weak, it makes you smart. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Women came up to me afterward, crying, hugging me, telling me their own stories. It was overwhelming and beautiful and exhausting, and I did it anyway. Because I'd learned something in those months of legal battles and public scrutiny. Your story doesn't belong to just you. When you speak your truth, especially a truth that resonates with pain other people have felt, it becomes part of a larger narrative. And you have a responsibility to that narrative, to tell it clearly and honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. The speaking led to more opportunities, a podcast about women in business, an article for a legal journal about economic abuse in divorce, a consultation with a nonprofit that helped women escape financially controlling relationships. I said yes to the things that felt aligned, no to the things that felt exploitative. I was learning, slowly, to trust my own judgment about what served me and what didn't. Marcus, I heard through mutual acquaintances, had moved to Colorado, started over. He'd told people that I'd destroyed his reputation unfairly, that the whole thing had been a misunderstanding, that he'd been the real victim. Some people probably believed him. That used to bother me. The idea that somewhere out there people thought I was vindictive, calculating, cold. Now I understood. Let them think what they want. The people who matter, the ones who actually know me, who've seen the evidence, who understand the difference between standing up for yourself and being cruel, those people know the truth. Part 11. The Gift. On the 1-year anniversary of signing those papers, I did something I'd been planning for months. I established a fund, the Catherine Ashford Foundation for Economic Justice in Divorce. It wasn't a huge amount, $100,000 to start, from the sanctions Marcus had been ordered to pay me, but it was enough to help 10 women afford good legal representation when leaving financially abusive marriages. Enough to pay for forensic accountants, private investigators, expert witnesses, enough to give them what I'd had. Resources, strategy, a fighting chance. You're giving away your victory money? David had asked when I told him my plan. I'm investing it, I corrected. In other women's victories, the foundation launched quietly, but word spread. Lawyers started referring clients. Nonprofits reached out about partnerships. Within 6 months, we'd helped 23 women. Some got their houses back. Some got fair custody arrangements. Some just got out alive, with enough money to start over. Every single one of them got to keep their dignity. I hired a director, a brilliant woman named Maria, who'd been through her own financially abusive divorce and had later become a family law attorney specifically to help other women, and stepped back to let her run things. My job was fundraising and advocacy, the big picture stuff. But I read every application that came in, every story of manipulation, coercion, hidden assets, and threatened reputations. Every plea for help from women who just wanted what they'd earned, what they deserved, what was legally theirs. And I approved as many as we could afford, because here's what I'd learned. Justice shouldn't be a luxury. Protection shouldn't require wealth. And no woman should have to choose between her safety and her security because she can't afford to fight. The foundation was my answer to that impossible choice. It wasn't enough. There were too many women, too few resources. But it was something. It was a start. Part 12. The Moment of Truth. 18 months after the transfer was voided, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I'd learned to be cautious about unexpected calls, but something made me pick up. Catherine? The voice was familiar, but smaller somehow. Diminished. Marcus? Silence. I waited. I learned patience, too. He stopped. Started again. I need to tell you something. And I need you to just listen. Can you do that? I'm listening. You were right. About all of it. I was trying to steal from you. I was manipulating you. I convinced myself it was okay because I'd fallen out of love, and I thought that meant I didn't owe you anything anymore. Like loving someone else erased all the promises I'd made to you. I didn't say anything. He'd asked me to listen, and I was listening. I lost everything, you know? The business is barely hanging on. Vivian left. I'm living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Denver, working contract jobs because nobody in Montana will hire me. And I kept thinking, this is Catherine's fault. She destroyed my life. She was vindictive and cruel, and she turned everyone against me. My hand tightened on the phone, but I stayed quiet. But that's not true, is it? You didn't destroy my life. I did. I destroyed my own life and our marriage and any chance I had at being someone decent. And then when you refused to just disappear and let me pretend it had never happened, I blamed you for that too. He exhaled shakily. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I'm calling because my therapist said I needed to take accountability, not to make myself feel better, but because you deserved to hear it. You deserved a lot of things I never gave you, and the very least I can give you now is the truth. The truth being, my voice was calm, neutral.
That I see what I did. Finally. that it was fraud and manipulation and abuse, that you weren't being difficult or vindictive by fighting back. You were being smart and strong and exactly what anyone should be when someone tries to steal their life. And I'm sorry, Catherine. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know you probably don't care. But I'm sorry. I looked out the window at the ranch, my ranch, bathed in afternoon light. I thought about that woman I used to be, the one who would have cried at this apology, who would have taken his regret and turned it into hope that maybe things could be different. Maybe he changed. Maybe there was still something to salvage. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Thank you for calling, I said. I appreciate you saying that. That's it? He sounded almost disappointed, like he'd expected more reaction. That's it. You apologized. I heard you. But Marcus, I paused, choosing my words carefully. I need you to understand something. Your accountability is for you, not for me. I don't need it to move on. I already have. Whether you'd called today or never called at all, my life would be exactly the same. Full. Complete. Mine. I know, he said quietly. I know that now. I hope therapy helps you, I said, and I meant it. I hope you figure out how to be better. Not for me, we're done, but for yourself and for whoever comes next. There's no one next, he said. I think I need to be alone for a while. Figure out who I am without needing someone else to make me feel worthwhile. That's probably wise, I said. We said goodbye. I hung up. And I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even relief. Just a quiet acknowledgement that a chapter was finally, truly closed. That night, I called my mother. We'd been distant for years. She'd sided with Marcus initially, unable to believe that her charming son-in-law could be capable of what I'd accused him of. But after the trial, after the evidence became public, she'd called me crying. I should have believed you immediately, she'd said. I should have trusted my daughter over a man I barely knew. I'm so sorry, baby. We were rebuilding, slowly. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight. Marcus called, I told her. What did he want? To apologize, to take accountability. And? How do you feel? I thought about it. Free, I said finally. I feel free, not because he apologized, that was for him, but because I realized while he was talking that he has absolutely no power over me anymore. Not my emotions, not my peace, not my future. He's just someone I used to know. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then, your grandmother would be so proud of you. My eyes stung. You think? I know. She used to say, the strongest steel goes through the hottest fire. You went through the fire, Catherine, and you came out steel. Epilogue. The $5 frame. The ranch is thriving. I've expanded the guest house into a proper retreat space and now host quarterly workshops for women rebuilding their lives after divorce. We do equine therapy with the horses, financial planning sessions, legal rights workshops, and a lot of sitting on the porch, drinking coffee, and just being. Existing without performance, without apology. The foundation has helped over 100 women now. Maria is amazing. She's grown it beyond anything I could have imagined. Securing grants, building partnerships, creating a network of lawyers willing to take cases pro bono or reduced rate. I've started dating again. Nothing serious, but I'm open to it in a way I wasn't before. There's a veterinarian in town, James, who makes me laugh and doesn't need me to be anything other than who I am. We'll see where it goes. And if it goes nowhere, that's okay too. But the thing people ask me most when they hear my story is always the same. Do you regret it? The publicity, the fight, the way it all became so public? And my answer is always no. Because here's what that fight gave me. It gave me my voice back.
It gave me the knowledge that I could stand up to someone I'd once loved, someone who'd had power over me, and not only survive, but prevail. It gave me a purpose, helping other women that I'd never have found if I just accepted that $5 transfer and disappeared. It gave me myself. The $5 check still sits on my desk, bronzed and framed. Sometimes visitors see it and don't understand. Why keep it? They ask. Why display something that represents such betrayal? But that's not what it represents to me. Not anymore. It represents the moment I stopped being afraid, the moment I chose strategy over surrender, the moment I looked at what someone was trying to take from me and said, "No, you don't get to do this." It represents the moment I remembered my worth. And every time I look at it, I remember silence is only powerful when you choose it. When someone forces it on you, it's just another theft. And I'm done being stolen from. The sun is setting again, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The horses are settling in for the night. Somewhere in the house, my phone is buzzing with messages. Workshop participants, foundation applicants, speaking requests. But right now, I'm just sitting on the porch of my ranch, my land, my home, drinking coffee and watching the day end. I'm Catherine Rose Ashford. I'm 52 years old, I'm divorced, thriving, and finally, at peace with the woman I see in the mirror. And I'm worth a hell of a lot more than $5. Always have been. I just had to fight to remember it.